Comic books.
Comic books.
Comics. Comic book podcasts.
We like
Comic books.
because they have no bones.
I'm Joe Getcho,
And I'm Mike White.
and this is We Like Comics because they have no bones.
And as always, check out all the social media links for Instagram, Facebook. We are Boneless Comics Podcast, and on Twitter at Boneless Comics 1.
That's right, and you can also find us on YouTube at Boneless Comics Podcast for the after show, or our WordPress site, bonelesscomicspodcast.wordpress.com, for lots of cool bonus material like creator bios, readable versions of our story notes, and more. And also, video podcasts.
That's right, for the first time ever.
So, what has been your favorite part of starting this project last year?
I think, at least for me, my favorite part has just been able to collaborate and do something creative. We've sort of done stuff like this over the years for a long time on and off, but it's never been a finished product or something that really I was like, I want to put my stamp on that and put it out there and say, yeah, we made this. So years ago we were doing like film score reviews on a website that I don't think that ever went anywhere, and I don't know. It's just been a fun project to actually be creating something in my free time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I don't know, we just sort of toyed with the idea and we're like, well, let's just try it and see where it goes. And we did just sort of an intro episode and it seemed to go okay. So
Yeah.
then after that we did our first review and it just kept going from there.
Yeah. What do you think has been the biggest surprise about doing this year, or maybe to put it a different way, what's been the biggest like unexpected challenge of it? And I think I know what you're going to say.
The
but-
editing?
Yeah.
Well, not just that, but also like being able to talk about what we're reading in sort of a coherent way and have stronger opinions on it, because I'm not necessarily a super opinionated person and I don't really tend to talk about them at great length. So it's interesting and it's kind of a fun balancing act between the two of us of, give and take and having that conversation like we usually do, but recording it and editing it and putting it online for lots of people to hear, which has definitely been a surprise that people want to hear us.
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that we've gone up to like 40 people, which I know doesn't sound like much, is surprising to me given that we've only been doing it for a few months.
Yeah.
And that we've got enough episodes in the bag to kind of call it a season and end a season is kind of a big deal too. So it feels like we've gotten a lot done in a short time. Thanks everybody for, listening and being out there, because that's honestly what's keeping us from just sending this out into the void and it going nowhere. So yeah, we appreciate it.
Absolutely. We need listeners to listen and also to interact with us on social media and to share us with your friends. Shameless plugs for the win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like our t-shirts.
Yeah, there you go. You can also, no, you can't order merchandise, but
Not yet. Coming soon.
But we'll probably do that.
yeah,
at
we'll
some
do
point.
we'll do that at some point.
So, I was going to ask you, should we address the sort of elephant in the room about the theme song or the title of the podcast? Have we really ever explained that?
I don't
fully?
think so. Do we know why?
I know why.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
We do. Okay.
I know why.
We do. It is because of the catchy theme song. No, but it was also that song was sung by Space Ghost. Was that Coast to Coast or was that
I think it was Cartoon Planet.
Cartoon
so
Planet?
it's going back further than Coast to Coast even.
I like bananas because they have no bones. Yeah, Macaulay Culkin starred in Home Alone. If your dog has tartar, go get him some of those little doggy bones. Yeah.
Yeah, so he made up his own kind of weird lyrics to that song, and I don't know, it was just funny and entertaining and weird, and that's us. So we decided to sort of steal that, but then it got back to, like, I was tracing down the origins of it, and it actually is a song from, like, the, I don't know, 30s or something,
Yeah.
way out there, so I figured it was fair use at this point.
We like bananas because they have no bones.
But we had a little spin on it. So we used the banana logo, as you see here. Mike drew the superhero kind of attire for it to give him. He's got like a bone and then like a red thing on it to say, no bones allowed, because, we like comics because they have no bones.
Exactly.
Give him a red cape. I actually did some digital coloring, and then we put it on a background of some of our favorite comics. Like we've got Spider-Man and Green Arrow, and I think there's an Aquaman underneath the words.
Well, I have averaged all of our scores for each episode. And so we'll arrive at a numerical average for each score that we get between Joe and I. And the one that came out on top, or the biggest winner of the year, was Mr. Miracle. And that was at a 4.5. I gave it a 5, and I think you gave it a 4. And the biggest loser was, interestingly, a three-way tie because of how the averages came out between Star Trek The Next Generation Hive, Spider-Woman Origin, which we've also got right here, and Batman Last Night on Earth, which I forgot to bring with me. So, but they're tied for last place with a 2.75 average. And if we had to pick a tiebreaker for last place, which one would you go with? That you were like, this was really just like the worst thing that I read this year.
Well, that's an interesting question. Like Star Trek The Next Generation, I think I rated that higher than you did.
Mm-hmm.
So that wouldn't be my one for last place.
Yeah.
Batman Last Night on Earth, I mean, it's not that it was bad. It was just that it wasn't something I was that interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't necessarily rate it low from like a creative standpoint. But Spider-Woman Origin, like like I said during the episode, I just felt like this was your chance to have something like really, really good, and it just really wasn't. And so I think that would be the last place one for me. It's just like I expected more from it. Like Last Night on Earth, I expected it to be dark and gritty and Batman and, all of those kind of crazy things. And it just
Right.
seemed like, well, this is one of those weird Batman stories that I don't care for. Whereas with this, it was like, this really was your opportunity to reboot this character.
Yeah, Batman, the very concept was just something that you're like, this doesn't really connect with me. But this was very much like you were like, I'm all in for what they're trying to do. I just didn't care for the implementation, or maybe some of what Bendis was doing feels like a little bit dated writing for female characters now. That's interesting because that's what I would pick as well. And I actually rated that higher than Star Trek The Next Generation Hive. I think that was my lowest score this year. Mm-hmm. And that honestly was because Brandon Braga is just a veteran Star Trek writer, and he's contributed so much to the franchise. I felt like you're somebody that should be moving beyond just spitting out a concept that's been in your brain. Like, you should be able to flesh this out into something that's completely three-dimensional and has character development and all that. That being said, I realize that he's not really the writer that does those things. Mm-hmm. Specifically, he's more of the high-concept guy. He wrote Cause and Effect, so he likes to do the time loop and all the hard sci-fi elements, which all that stuff is really important for Star Trek, but I just felt like there was so much potential in the story that when it was feeling like it was almost plagiarizing some of his own work, and then the artist literally plagiarizing photographs and stuff like that, that really turned me off. So that's why I rated that so low at the time. But if I really had to think about it and think about the stories we read this year, especially after hearing your breakdown of Spider-Woman Origin, and I know you didn't want to affect my opinion, but if I had to correct something, I would go back and knock it down probably a whole I was going to say a whole letter grade, a whole number grade, because it was kind of fine for what it was when I was reading it, and I was like, oh yeah, this is all right. It's kind of weird. It could have been better. But the more I thought about it and the more I kind of let the story sit with me, the more I was like, this just really was not as good as it could have been. So if I had the opportunity to go back in time and change that to where it wasn't so much of like a knee-jerk reaction, kind of let the story sit with me for a little bit longer, I think I would have rated it lower. But I don't know.
I think they suffered from sort of the same gripe that we have with them, is just that what we were expecting, and maybe it's our own fault for expecting what we were, but it's like Spider-Woman Origin, after coming in for so many years of the character being inactive, to like, here's a main title. And then also for somebody who's been on the creative team of Star Trek for so long, it's like, okay, this isn't somebody taking a shot at a new story and we'll see how it goes. It's like, you guys are pros in these industries, so I guess we just kind of expected more out of them. Whereas Last Night on Earth, again, it's not that it was written poorly or anything. It just it was more of a personal preference. So
and I think it just connected with me just slightly more. I think I was only maybe like 0.5 above your score or something like
Yeah.
that. But it just where our scores landed, it ended up averaging out all three of those to a 2.75. So they're just kind of interesting. So I guess to back up a little bit, and if we wanted, so the biggest loser, I think, if we had to pick one, would be Spider-Woman. Unfortunately, sorry, Brian Michael Bendis. You've been
That was dramatic. I'm sorry.
Throw it in the trash. Yeah. No, it wasn't just absolute garbage. I think we want to not get to a place where we're just being so critical that we don't get enjoyment from comic stories anymore. Let's back up a little bit and talk about Mr. Miracle being the big winner for the year, because that was really interesting to me in that you specifically said this doesn't really connect with me that personally, but it's just so well written that I'm going to give it a 4 anyway, which I thought was kind of cool. I think it's really easy to take something and be like, the concept just didn't connect with me, so I'm going to rate it down or something like that. And for me, it hit kind of that personal note, and it was really well implemented, so that's why I gave it a 5. But that's the only 5 I gave out this year.
Yeah, and it's not like I didn't like it or something. It just like it just, I don't know, it just wasn't for me. Like
Right.
it wasn't so outside of, like Last Night on Earth was just like way out there.
Yeah.
This wasn't. I mean, it was a little way out there, but it was a cool concept, and some of the mysteries that they had in it were fun. But it overall, it's just, that's not my favorite hero. No big deal.
For sure. No, I can totally see that. I just thought it was interesting that wasn't like, it wasn't necessarily your favorite idea or hero, but that was one of the, or I guess that's what averaged out to be our highest this year. You did give a lot of 4s to other stuff though. Mega Man, Hellboy, and Batgirl.
Yeah.
Which, interestingly, when we land on a 4, we seem to be on the same page for the most part, because all of those we both ended up giving the same score to. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know. It seemed like once we get into the nitty-gritty of the 3s and the 2s, we have more disagreement. But on the positive end of the spectrum, we seem to be mostly on the same page.
Yeah,
so,
that's interesting. Well, and a lot of times it's for different reasons. I think especially our lowest scores were all for completely different reasons. Like we both agreed that we're going to rate it lower, but it wasn't for the same like motivation, versus the ones that we like the most. I think we kind of like them for the same reasons.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially Batgirl. I think that one we were very much on the same page. Like, yes, this is how we want to see female characters portrayed in comic books, and hopefully moving forward. So
I kind of wonder about Hellboy, like if some of our, because we know the character, like what happens to him later, it filled in some of the blanks in that story, and so it just sort of like, oh, this is favorable because it's an origin for a character that we like, and it was done pretty well, so yeah, let's rate it high.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, that I wonder if we were to go back and be a little bit more critical, if we would have dropped it down to a 3 or something like that, because there was a lot that wasn't there that we know is filled in later, and so we were kind of going, well, it's fine. It's an early, attempt at this character, and we know it's going to be fleshed out later, so it's fine. But really, I think it would have been better to rate just what was on the page. But that's something we've been learning over this past year, I think, is just how to, well, what even is our system for rating? I don't know that we really have a system necessarily. Maybe we should develop something.
Bananas.
Well, I mean, besides bananas, but there are other podcasts out there that are very clear about, like, here are our rules. In order for it to be a 4, it has to achieve this thing and be something that I would definitely recommend to somebody else. Or in order to be a 5, it's got to be like something that I say is essential that nobody should ever skip. And I don't know if we want to define it that clearly or not, but
I don't necessarily want to have like parameters that the book rates itself almost, like do we feel ABC, and then that's the rating that we come up with. Like I think a lot of our discussions about why we do or don't like something, those are probably the best parts of the podcast, is like, what does this mean to you? What is it similar to that you've experienced, and how does that make you feel about this story or this character or whatever is going on, and also to find out like what what's out there, because I think this is good for me too to experience some of what's on the DC side, but also to read more about some characters that I've been like, oh, I know about that character and I've kind of heard some things, or I've seen them as like a team up or something, but actually to read a story with them, like Mr. Miracle, it's not something that I really would have picked up before, but at least now I'm like, okay, I have an idea of what Mr. Miracle is about and what his
Right.
stories are like, at least by Tom King anyway. um, but just to get familiar with the character, and then also with Tom King too and his writing,
Yeah.
and know what I'm in for when I see his name on a cover of whatever it is, whether it's a favorite character or a character that I don't really know. So
Yeah, he tends to delve into those kind of mental health issues. That tends to be something that he's very interested in. I don't know that his Batman run necessarily is very concerned with that, but a lot of his standalone stuff very much is, which most of what he does are those DC Black Label books that are kind of standalone 12-issue maxi series. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask, are there things in comics that you've learned over the last year like immediately turn you off? Like if you see bad art or if they're focusing on more narrative over character development, are there things that you automatically notice that you're like, that's something that kind of turns me off when I'm reading it? Or
I don't know if it necessarily defined anything new, because it's always been like that for me. It's like, when you're reading a trade, especially, you get a couple issues in, not in this one, but just an example.
I was gonna say, in
And-
that one you need to get like 9 issues in. To have
Yeah.
any idea what's going on?
But just as an example, like in general, you get to a certain point and then the artist changes and it's like a drastic, okay, we went from these super detailed, over muscular whatever to now everybody's sort of like amorphous blobs and there's just, one muscle in the arm instead of like, all these kinds of details. And it's just like so different that
Yeah.
you're like, okay, it sort of takes me out of it as I'm going through this story. Those are the kind of things that really pull me out the most. I think the ones that are hardest are like you read something and it's got like either it's an event or a tie-in, or they dump a bunch of characters that you've never heard of, or you just haven't read. If you stick to one character, you're going to know about that character and sort of their rogues gallery, like with Spider-Man, for example, and the characters that are in that. But Marvel's a big place, so is DC, so are the others. You get all these characters that might show up in the story and you're like, well, who's this person that they're talking to? And I think that's the other thing, is like you kind of get lost in the story if other characters come in because you don't know what's going on outside of that.
There's not to bring up Tom King again, but his Heroes in Crisis book is very much that way, where there's lots of cutaways to characters that have not been in comics for a while or that we haven't seen a whole lot, and there's a lot of obscure sort of Easter egg throw-ins, and it's a pretty polarizing book anyway as far as what people think of it, but yeah, that's one where I find it a little bit distracting, where it's just like, okay, are we just throwing in these guys just to throw them in and show how many references he knows, or is it going to go somewhere? So I think part of the fun of this, though, in hitting such a diverse array of characters, is that we can expose, hopefully, an audience to how wide a variety of characters there are in comics, because it really isn't just Spider-Man or Superman or Batman or, like kind of the core guys. There's a lot of the second stringers or even third stringers out there that are really interesting. And something that I'm really excited to do in the next year is to get into some of those guys like Nova and She-Hulk and I don't know, Moon Knight, and I mean name some other people that aren't quite so mainstream, although a lot of them have TV shows coming or event books coming. But I think it's going to be fun to get outside of the kind of core mainstream guys. I mean, Aquaman is my favorite at DC, and we haven't really done anything on him this year, so I'm hopeful to get into some of my favorites, but also some of the more off the beaten path characters.
Yeah. That's sort of what we want to do, is like stay sort of current with what's being released as far as movies and TV shows and stuff go, just to sort of give you an idea of this is who the character is in the comics, and maybe try to contrast that with what we see on the film, or just maybe to prepare you for this was the comic version, this was the history, and then going into the show, you're like, okay, I can recognize a couple things. But also for us, obviously hosting it, we want to cover characters that we find interesting or that we're interested to, delve into. So there's a lot of room for us to kind of plug in, whatever characters that we want to. But I think that's one of the benefits for me is trying books like Fables. I never would have read Fables. I'm glad I did.
Right.
I don't remember what I rated it. Hopefully it wasn't too bad.
I think you gave it, if I remember correctly, you gave
a
it like a
3?
3, I think. And it was, I know that you said it was very, like, completely fully fleshed out.
I think it
I
was
remember
the
that being your
story.
thought.
The story that they used could have been like any
Yeah.
characters. It didn't really have much to do with.
Mhm.
They didn't really use those elements, I think. But at the same time, like it wasn't something like that took away from the story. It was still interesting. I still liked it. I'm glad
Yeah.
that I read it. And that's what I mean is like that's not something I would normally pick off the shelf. Even if
Right.
I was like, I want to try something new today, I wouldn't grab that. But I'm glad I did.
Right.
And not only did I get to read it, but I also got to talk about it with you, and then people listened to it, which still blows my mind. But it was fun. So
Who are you people?
yeah, right.
Fables was one that I was keen to do mainly because my little sister is a big fan. So she's like 10 or 11 trades in, and I think she's got several of the spin-off trades as well. So she's got kind of a bigger picture of that universe. It was something that was kind of fun for us both to read back and forth because we were reading some of the same things, and she was into comics before that, but I think that was the first time that she really picked something that was purely her own thing. So it was cool to kind of look back at that. I'm pretty certain that she got turned on to it because she was taking a college course where they were analyzing different forms of media. And comic books were one of them, and that was what the professor picked. So that's what actually got her started on that, yeah. So, I mean, they covered a lot of ground. They watched, like, Pacific Rim, and
Wow.
I think it was focused on pop culture specifically, but yeah, pretty cool way
Sounds
to
fun.
get into comics. I know. I wish I took that class actually. Just watch Pacific Rim and then get an A or something. I'm sure they had to talk about it, but
Yeah.
So Joe, what are you most excited to jump into next year with all the stuff that we have?
Anything Spider-Man related? Spider-Man.
Well,
Spider-Man.
I know.
Okay.
I know. Besides
Sorry.
Spider-Man,
Okay.
since we just talked about going
Venom,
outside mainstream characters.
Spider-Woman. Outside of mainstream characters.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to Moon Knight because he's crazy and I like Deadpool and
I am
crazy,
too.
so that's fun. I kind of want to read some of the like Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider. There's some good runs on that. I think we're in a really good time to be doing this too, is because like there's so many characters out there that have either been undiscovered or just really haven't been done much with in comics, and there's like a gold mine there essentially of bringing comics to the big screen or to TV shows, like with Shang-Chi, that there wasn't much with this character to begin with, and now we have this movie, and now they're involved with Doctor Strange and all this stuff going on, and it's fun to take those characters that maybe are sort of on the background that we don't hear much of and put them in the mix with characters that we do know, that we have heard of, like Doctor Strange, and even teaming up with Spider-Man or something, just to get some more team ups going on in movies and TV, and have crossovers like they do in the comics. I like seeing that sort of stuff and taking what I enjoy about the characters in the comics and seeing them like sort of represented in that live action, as long as they do it in a way that honors the original character and not like a Wolverine or X-Men Wolverine origin where let's not even go there. So that's
it's still, I would argue it's 2/3 of a great movie, but that other 1/3 is so bad.
Oof.
It's so bad.
But yeah, that's what I look forward to, is just kind of discovering the characters and seeing who's out there and what's interesting.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to get more out of the mainstream. I mean, I hope we can do Fantastic Four this year as well. Just cover one of their arcs, maybe by Jonathan Hickman. Or, I mean, even go back to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby days and read, like, their early appearance or something like that. But just to kind of set the stage, because they haven't appeared in a good movie ever, and I would assume that they're going to be joining the MCU at some point, but they have a very specific thing that they do really well, and I don't think that the movies have ever really captured that. So it's going to be interesting to see how they move forward with that. And I would like to, because a lot of the guys that I've picked over the years that I really enjoy, it's because I'm reading them and I know, hey, these comics are good. And then sort of a bad adaptation gets shot up to the silver screen or even to TV, and people start to laugh and they're like, oh, you like those guys? Like, they're terrible. And so that's the disappointing thing I think about bad adaptations, is that it sort of gets this opinion out there in the general population that, like, oh, the Fantastic Four suck, or Aquaman sucks, or I mean, I think Jason Momoa has kind of changed that, but just by nature of being Jason Momoa, but he's very much 90s Aquaman, so he's a very specific era of that character.
Yeah,
but,
that's the thing, is like, and that's sort of what we're trying to bring too, is like to connect the dots between the movies, the shows, the comics, and not just, comics in general, but like, okay, the previous versions back in the 60s and and the 90s, and then what's currently going on here. And it's sort of like, I really feel like, and I know I'm going to throw Spider-Man in here again, but it's sort of like Spider-Man No Way Home, and I'm sorry if you haven't seen it. It's been out long enough. I feel like
spoiler alert.
We can drop a couple spoilers here, but being able to mix the different versions of sort of the same character together, and it's like each one has its pros and cons, and everybody's gonna, I think, disagree about what the best version is, but I think that's a good thing, because you have three strong versions that both have all three have their flaws, but they all three have things that they bring, and to actually see them interact together is like amazing. Amazing.
Agreed.
But also, just being able to look at these things and say, I like this about this version, but I like this about this version, and this, well, it's kind of weird, but I like the concept. It's interesting what you can do here.
Yeah.
So that's fun. I enjoy that part.
Yeah, I enjoy that too. It was definitely a good movie, and it was a good, just kind of a nostalgia trip, while also oddly giving Tom Holland's Spider-Man more character development than any movie that he's been in.
Besides being Stark's little whipping boy.
Yeah, basically. So, all right, let's see. We talked about the different ratings. We talked about what we're excited to jump into next year.
Did you answer the questions of, like, what was the most challenging part for you, and then what was the thing that surprised you the most?
The most challenging part for me, I think, has, first of all, it's been trying to find the energy to balance this with my work schedule, because work takes a lot out of me, and I wish that I could do this more full time. Honestly, I mean, if I was putting 100% of my energy into the podcast, I think we could really make it truly excellent. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I've got to, we've made like $5 so far. So thanks everybody.
Thank you. Hey, every little bit is good and helps us.
No,
with,
it really is. It really is. We do appreciate that. But yeah, I think that's been the biggest challenge. That, and really finding a good balance of stories so that we're not spreading ourselves too far in one direction, Marvel or DC, or even sort of leaning into just what's popular, because I do want to focus on a lot of stuff that is outside the norm, just so that people are aware of it, because that's a lot of fun for me, is to be like, hey, if you like this character, maybe you should check out Green Lantern, or maybe you should check out Green Arrow, or, all of that. That's fun for me, is to sort of broaden people's horizons. Green Arrow is actually another good one to bring up, because I think if we can get into that character and how almost like fundamentally different he is from the Arrowverse version, who's basically Batman with arrows. That would be an interesting discussion too. So I think the thing that surprised me the most is that there are so many kind of middling comic stories out there that are maybe things that I enjoyed, but once I started to break them down critically, I started to see more cracks in them. And I'm hoping that that's not an indicator that I'm going to start to enjoy comic books less just because we're trying to pick them apart for a review. Because I don't want to get into that zone of just being critical for the sake of being critical.
Right.
I do want to communicate that we do actually just love comics or like comics, whichever however you we like them. And we don't love them, but we like them. But yeah, I don't want to lose that passion for the material just because it's become a chore to review it or something like that. So, but I think the other thing that's really come into focus for me this year is that I really do prefer character development over narrative, and the Star Trek story in particular is one where I was like, the story is moving, but they are not slowing down for there to be character development, and that to me is a blow to it because you can have the most amazing action sci-fi spectacle, but if there's no emotional character arc anchoring you to it, then I don't care.
Yeah.
It's why Transformers 2 I think there's a scene in that's like a 35-minute action scene in the middle of the movie, and I almost fell asleep because I'm just like, I don't care. It's just like CGI robots fighting on the screen. I have no connection to it. So
whereas in the first one, you get a connection to Bumblebee and kind of the main characters of what's going on, and then later when those characters aren't really there, or you still have him, but you're introducing all these others, and they're just just going at each other, and you're like, who's who again? Why are they fighting? Is it the Allspark? Is it because of Megan Fox? Is it because of what's going on?
They're all fighting over Megan Fox. That's why they're fighting.
I guess so.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we?
I think that was good. We just wanted to go over what we have reviewed in the last year and say thanks everybody for listening. And we're looking forward to season 2.
Yeah.
To be awesome, and really pull out the stops of just anything and everything. And again, not just Marvel or DC, but anything's fair game. If you have any recommendations, feel free. Social media, blow us up. And just say, you should review this, you should review that. And, we'll take those into consideration and see what comes out. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think we've got to cover Ninja Turtles this year. So we've got to go to IDW and hit some other indie publishers.
Yeah.
I think Boom Studios and Dynamite are a couple other big ones that we haven't reviewed anything by them. I can't remember which one of them has Power Rangers, but I'm pretty sure we'd be interested in at least trying something from that maybe. They had a crossover with the Justice League at some point. I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there. So everybody obviously stay tuned. And I don't know that we're exactly ready to announce where we're going to go next, but just stick with us. And thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much. It's been fun. We like comics because they have no bones. And don't forget it.
Yep.
And we'll get you later.
Macaulay Culkin starred in Home Alone.
Comic books.
Comic books. Comics.
Comic book podcast. Comics. That'll be the
Except
cover.
Clearly,
image.
we don't shave. So
True.
you don't know the pain.
The pain of the shave.